present here. I, Srishti Chawla, Legal Aid Convener, welcomes you on behalf of INBA. Our session on the topic Emerging Trends in International Trade and Ease of Doing Business is about to begin. Our keynote speaker. Yes. Yes, sir. Sir, ma'am, this is track 2. Track 2. Welcome, no problem. Our keynote speaker for this session is Ms. Purnima Voria, founder and CEO, National US-India Chamber of Commerce. We would like to welcome her. Our moderator for our session is Ms. Shiny Pradeep. He's the Assistant Professor, Center for Trade and Investment Law, Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. Our speakers for the session are Mr. Ashishdeep Verma, Founder, Managing Partner, Vidhi Sastras, Advocates and Solicitors, Mr. Rajiv Chauhan, General Counsel and Executive Vice President, Legal Compliances and Ethics at Pernod Ricard India Private Limited. And lastly, our speaker is Mr. Prakhar Bharadwaj, Senior Research, Center for Trade and Investment Law, Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. I would like to welcome all, and we will first begin with the PPT by Ms. Purnima. I would like to, yes ma'am, please.
Good afternoon. I guess it's hard to talk after lunch because everybody wants to sleep. But I bring greetings to you from United States to India for the 69th Constitution Day from all the Indians in the United States as well as others. So congratulations, India, for celebrating this today. I also want to thank the Indian National Bar Association as well as the Florida Bar Association for doing this and inviting us from far and near to make this a very successful event. I learned a lot in all the sessions that I sat, so thank you very much. I will start giving you a lot of scenarios, and also some of these relevant topics are on legal stuff, so you'll see me reading a little bit, so please don't mind that. Because these are some of the policies and things that Government of India has put up, so I want to be sure that I give you the correct thing. So emerging trends in international trade and ease of doing business. We have heard about that a lot. Let's talk about it more. International trade should play a central role in international efforts towards the development agenda beyond 2018 for inclusive and sustainable development, transformational shifts in the global economy in the 21st century have presented both challenges and opportunities for trade to play this role. This need to be addressed by conscious policy efforts, and as the successful transmission of gains from trade integrations to broad-based inclusive development is not an automatic process. Trade policy alone cannot put in place the conditions necessary for this to happen, but needs to be supported by a wide range of complementary policies within a coherent and integrated strategic development framework. It should aim to enhance the link between trade productive investments and employment creation by promoting diversification into higher value added activities together with the well-functioning of markets The role of the state is pivotal in identifying and implementing policy mixes that are best defined to national circumstances and conditions. Strengthening coherence in international economic policymaking is not only between trade and international finance, but also between trade and development policies might be instrumental for aligning trade, liberalization approaches with inclusive development. Imperative coherence should be reinforced between multilateral and regional agreements so that these arrangements in their totality can turn into effective enabling environment for development and marginalization of the weaker and less developed economies does not take place. Beyond the Doha round, invigorating the negotiation function of the multilateral trading system will need to be tackled in the future. For global economic governance to be attained, a strong dispute settlement mechanism in the WTO has to be accompanied by a proper legislative functioning of the system, able to make rules in existing and new areas. The United Nations system, particularly in Geneva Hub, can and should play a catalytic role in strengthening the multilateral trade system. Different cooperative framework put in place in UNCTAD and other partners have proven particularly successful in the last decade when dealing with sensitive issues in areas such as investment, trade, facilitation, and competition policy. They were based on the soft lawmaking approach, which consists in forging an international consensus on emerging issues through better data and analysis. Knowledge of best practices, model laws and regulations, peer reviews, policy reviews, and other means of knowledge creation and consensus building needs to happen. Such cooperative framework should be instrumental in creating an enabling environment in the areas of trade, contributing to unlocking obstructive negotiation process and therefore bolster the multilateral trade system. Now let's talk about the next slide. Could you please go to the next one? Emerging trends in global trade. I think you're not on the right slide. Okay, good, good. So significant trends that impact international trade and supply chain professionals, there are 4 things: managing complexity, supply chain cost optimization, rethinking the workforce, big data. Those are the 4 things. Now, managing complexity. Supply chain disruptions are one of the main concerns of affecting the business continuity. We noted complexity in the supply chain often occurs as a result of the following: expanded markets for customers and suppliers, supply chain disruptions caused by the changing customer demand, changing supply chain management practices, reducing the time of businesses to adapt to these changes. In other words, an expectation to acclimate and adjust expeditiously. Increased regulatory requirement across multiple geographies and the need to quickly interpret their impact on the supply chain. So let's talk about the supply chain optimization. One of the trends we found most interesting is the breadth of the influence companies have on their supply chain. So now let's go on to rethinking the workforce. When optimization, business performance, and resources, one question to consider is whether to insource or outsource the work. Big data, that's another challenge. The challenge companies face today in linking and efficiently feeding the supply chain. Big data, many businesses rely on the information to create a more efficient and foolproof control of their supply chains. Big data is a huge pun intended. Next slide, please. Global trade manual processes. Now we need to look at that too. Monopolize the time. The processes that respondent says consume the most of the time and create most perceived risks are manual processes that could be automated. Import documentation, licensing, customer broker management are the 2 activities that respondents said occupy most of their time and resources. Overall, the prime operational activities of the import and export compliance are a significant time drain. Global Trend manually GTM users and non-GTM users indicated that the same activities are the most taxing for their organizations. Next slide, please. Emerging trends in the global trade summary now. Despite the challenges within our global economy, global trade volumes will resume growth rates that exceeds the GDP. National governments view exports as key drivers in the economic growth, so the trend for trade liberalization will continue. As trade barriers are lifted, every industry will potentially find new geographic markets for their products and services. The rapid advances in technology will provide companies with the resources to manage their supply chains in real time. This means opportunities to grow their sales internationally while delivering their product more efficiently. Next slide, please. EODB, Ease of Doing Business, we have heard that a lot, is an index published by the World Bank. It is an aggregated figure that includes different parameters which define the ease of doing business in a country. For each of these indicators that form the part of statistic, ease of doing business is a distance to frontier score is computed and all the sources are aggregated. Need of the EODB, the complexity of the regulatory processes and the difficulty in compliance have been cited as impediment to the Economic Development Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion, called DIPP, Ministry of Commerce and Industries, MOC and I, Government of India, GOI, and has taken up a series of measures to simplify and rationalize the regulatory processes, registration and inspection processes, and introduction of information technology as enabler to make governance most effective and efficient. A 98-point action plan for improving the regulatory framework for business as part of ease of doing business in the country was shared and finalized at the National Workshop of Make in India, held on the 29th December 2014. Subsequently, a report titled Assessment of State Implementation of Business Reforms was released in September of 2015, capturing the findings after taking the stock of reform implemented by states between the period 1st January 2015 to 30th June 2015. The assessment, first of its kind, promoted both competitive and cooperative federalism among the states and union territories, the UTs. The first wave of regulatory improvement measures further created a need for sustain the momentum of regulatory reforms. With this background, the 340-point Business Reform Action, the BRAP, for states and union territories was circulated by DIP to all the states UT governments in the late October of 2015. For further implementation, DIP has launched this online portal to track the real-time ranking of states on the basis of number of reforms undertaken by them as identified over time. DIP, in partnership with the World Bank Group, announced the results of the assessment implementation of business reforms 2017 by the states. The online portal aims to provide the following: real-time ranking and tracking of the states and UTs based on the implementation of the recommendations. Details of the good practices to learn and replicate from the experience, provide information on current policies and practices across the state and UTs. DIP, in partnership with the World Bank Group, released the Business Reform Action Plan, which is called BRAP 2017, for implementation of the states' UTs on 13/4/2017. The action plan of 2017, including 405 recommendations for reforms on regulatory processes, policies, practices, and procedures spread across 12 reform areas. DIP, along with the World Bank, will carry out a comprehensive business-to-government plan feedback exercise this year, whereby feedback will be taken from businesses on the quality of implementation of these reforms claimed by the states and UTs. The feedback scores will be used to generate a ranking states UT in the term of reform implementation. Next slide, please. What doing business measures? 11 areas of regulation indicators. Starting a business procedure, time, cost, paid and minimum capital to start a limited liability company. Dealing with the construction permits, procedures, time, cost to complete all the formalities to build a warehouse and the quality control and safety mechanism in the construction permitting system. Third, getting electricity, procedures, time, and cost to get connected to the electrical grids, and the liability of electricity supply, and the transparency of the tariffs. Registering property, procedure time, cost to transfer a property, and the quality of the land administration system. Number 5 is getting credit, movable collateral law and credit information system. Protecting minority investors, minority shareholders, right in the related party, transactions, and in corporate governance. Paying taxes, payments, time, and total tax and contribution rate for a firm to comply with all the tax regulations as well as the post-filing processes. And trading across borders is another thing we need to discuss. Time and cost to export the product of comparative advantage and import auto parts. Enforcing contracts, time and cost to resolve a commercial dispute, and the quality of judicial processes. Number 10 is resolving insolvency, time, cost, outcome, and recovery rate for the commercial insolvency, and the strength of the legal framework for insolvency. Labor markets regulations, flexibility in the employment regulation, and aspects of the job quality classified as a reform. Trading across borders, international trade. Let's talk a little bit about that. Doing business records, the time and cost associated with the logical process of exporting and importing goods. Doing business measures, the time and cost, including tariffs, associated with these 3 sets of procedures, documentary compliances, border compliances, and domestic transport within the overall process of exporting and importing a shipment of goods. The ranking of the economies on the ease of trading across borders is determined by sorting their distances to frontier scores. For trading across borders, these scores are simple average of distance to frontier scores for the time and cost of the documentary compliance and border compliance to export and import. Although doing business collects and publishes data on time and cost for domestic transport, it does not use these data in calculating the distance to frontier score for trading across borders, or the ranking of the ease of trading across the borders. I think I'm going to skip through a little bit in shortage of time. Access to economic opportunities. I'll just say a little bit on that. While big businesses often find it easier to set up shops and deals with bureaucracy of setting up businesses, smaller companies and startups rely on systems that are easily accessible and reliable to their businesses. Lower transaction cost, less corruption. I'm going to skip all that. You guys already know that. I think evidently, it's important for local governments to consider economic environment along with processes and regulations set up for businesses. In the end, I will say only one thing, that businesses, you are all in legal profession here. What the National US-India Chamber of Commerce does is promote trade and investment between United States and India and other parts of the world. We are looking for partnership with you so that, because whenever companies come to India, you are the one who are facilitating that. And so this is an opportunity for you that this occasion has provided, and we'll be happy to engage with you in any possible way, and we are here to trade with you successfully and take care of everything. Thank you very much. I'm sorry it took a lot of time, but too much topic to be covered, so I apologize for overtaking the time. Thank you.
Now we would like to proceed with the panel discussion. I would like to invite all the learned panelists on the stage, please.
very good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Purnima ma'am, for a very detailed and comprehensive presentation covering all the major issues that pertain to international trade and ease of doing business, especially introducing the World Bank's rank of ease of doing business and the 11 indicators on which some of our panelists would be deliberating in detail. So to begin with, I think to put the whole discussion in perspective legally, I think the enforcement of the Trade Facilitation Agreement in 2017 is really important. The agreement was ratified by two-thirds of the WTO members in February 2017, and it actually covers the issues of border compliance management and transparency issues, cutting red tape in businesses and other governmental requirements quite in detail. Also, one important thing that it does is it seeks to promote capacity building in LDCs and developing countries to address these issues. So these actually have been the challenges that developing countries and LDCs have faced to sort of address these problems that have been persisting. So in the beginning, I would like to ask Prakhar to actually deliberate upon how regional trade agreements have catered to these trade facilitation provisions and ease of doing business provisions which can be found to an extent in some RTAs, and what trend have we seen in the recent time in the last couple of decades, not just a couple of decades, in fact, yeah. So since 1990s, the trend had started moving towards more and more RTAs, including trade facilitation provisions. And so I request Prakhar to actually give you a comprehensive background about that and deal with some of the nuances of these agreements.
Thank you, Shani, for that introduction. So the reason that I will focus today on regional trade agreements is because regional trade agreements will be the primary rule-making force when it comes to international trade for many decades to come. The multilateral system at the WTO is on its last breath. The last agreement that was negotiated successfully through consensus was the Trade Facilitation Agreement during the Bali round in 2013. And countries simply can't seem to agree on common ground on many issues. So what's going to impact our borders, what's going to impact our market access, or even national treatment, or other trade matters, even investment for that matter, is going to be regional trade agreements that India is going to enter into, right? Now, there is one very interesting thing about trade facilitation and regional trade agreements. Usually when two countries, say the Korea and the US, are going to negotiate certain regional trade agreement obligations, it's going to be for their exclusive benefit. For example, the US is going to say, listen, why don't you cut tariffs on semiconductors for my export of semiconductors to you, and I'll cut tariffs for your exports of automobile parts to me. And that will be to the exclusion of, say, automobile parts from India. But trade facilitation offers spillover effects which are non-discriminatory. For example, if India is tomorrow negotiating a trade facilitation provision with Singapore, and even if India negotiates a single window clearance or negotiates obligations to notify your laws regularly or to simplify your custom procedures, Singapore is not going to have multiple custom procedures, one complex for other nations and one simple for India, right? It makes sense for them to have unity and to unify those procedures. So to that extent, it makes negotiation dynamics very interesting. We at the Center for Trade and Investment Law often give technical advice to the Ministry of Commerce. So we deal with these issues day in and day out. And so what that really means is that for all parties who are engaging in regional trade agreements, and this is even true for, say, special interest groups like the CII or FICCI, who are pushing their interests with the government, it's important to see what is the trade facilitation that is already taking place in this jurisdiction, and as a negotiating point, do we really need to insist on it? Because it's something that we're already getting. Having said that, let's look at what is the development of trade facilitation provisions in regional trade agreements, okay? Anyone who's done a research on regional trade agreements, Indian regional trade agreements, will know that it's not very easy to do that because regional trade agreements aren't negotiated openly. And they're also very especially trade facilitation is a difficult topic to read about because unlike other provisions, it's not just bracketed under one heading. It can be something like paperless trade can be 50 provisions scattered across the treaty. But even if we look at our certain prominent regional trade agreements, the regional trade agreement with SAARC or the regional trade agreement with ASEAN in 2009, we see that it does not really go beyond what is given in GATT. So this is like the pre-trade facilitation agreement era. Trade facilitation came around in 2013. It was discussed in 2004. Now, when trade facilitation started being discussed at the WTO, countries realized that, okay, this is the basis, this is the minimum. If we want to negotiate something in a regional trade agreement, we must substantively go higher than this. So when we look at regional trade agreements after 2004, 2010, that is when we see that there are really some trends coming across. There are some issues which are gaining more momentum than others, and there are some players which are pushing for certain trade facilitation measures more than others. So not surprisingly, large developing countries like the US, EU are often the most enthusiastic proponents of trade facilitation measures. But also Southeast Asian countries, especially trading blocs led by Japan, Korea, Singapore, are also very heavy on trade facilitation agreements. In fact, if you read the Ease of Doing Business report, India has been complimented across all parameters in trading across borders. So it's something that we are, in fact, leading in some way, at least regionally. If we look at the kind of topics that are gaining prominence in regional trade agreements, the whole notion of making trade paperless is something which is really present and prevalent in a lot of regional trade agreements. In a 2016 ADB Institute study, it was found that the TPP, or the Trans-Pacific Partnership now without the US, refers to 21 out of 27 trade facilitation measures. So it has a lot, it covers trade facilitation agreements very, very comprehensively. And just to give you all a perspective, if there are 28 trade facilitation measures, 5 are covered under the WTO trade facilitation agreement. But 21 out of those 27 are covered in the TPP. And if we are to look at, the trade agreement or the regional trade arrangement with the maximum trade facilitation provisions, we can have a look at the recently concluded USMCA, or the United States-Mexico agreement, which really builds on the existing provision in the trade facilitation agreement in a very, very big way. In fact, there are now set certain de minimis thresholds, or which says that if the shipments are not beyond a certain measure, they will not be subject to any kind of custom procedures. So that's something which is really monumental for small and medium enterprises, right? So what do all of these trends? I'll just quickly conclude by giving some thoughts on what this means for India. Now, the biggest regional trade agreement for India as of today, you'll be seeing it in the papers every day, is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. It's with a lot of big trading nations in Southeast Asia, including Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Singapore. Interestingly, the trade facilitation chapter of the RCEP has already been concluded. So if we look at the trends, what can we expect? We already know that Southeast Asia is big on trade facilitation. We know that trade facilitation or TFA plus provisions which go above and beyond what is there in the trade facilitation chapter are gaining prominence. We also know that the Indian government wants to look after small and medium enterprises. So it would not be out of place to at least expect something which goes beyond the TFA or the trade facilitation agreement in the RCEP. Certainly small and medium enterprises would be looking forward to de minimis thresholds like they're set up in the USMCA, although whether that actually happens depends on a lot of other negotiating dynamics that we are not privy to. But let's just hope that whenever RCEP sees the light of day, and if it does, that the trade facilitation architecture is something that benefits Indian enterprises and especially the small and medium enterprises. Thank you.
Thank you, Prakhar. I think that was a really comprehensive description of what is prevailing at the international level, covering different regional trade agreements as well as the WTO's TFA. And so now I would like to request Mr. Rajiv Chauhan to please give his views on generally the scenario that is prevailing and what challenges is India facing in terms of making the changes to the requirements that we are supposed to fulfill at the international level, and generally about what, how Indian enterprises can benefit abroad.
Thank you, Shani. I have a slightly different perspective in terms of practicality because, I work in a business house. And what agreements do actually is that they provide a framework of what you can do, how you can facilitate, what are the new doors that you can't do. But if you look at the history of India, there was a time when India was 1/3 of the world GDP. And India actually was a hub of international trade from Persia to China to the Silk Route, et cetera, et cetera. And there were no trade agreements, right? So one is putting trade agreements on place for a formalized kind of character. But the real issue is what businessmen do across countries. And to me, when I travel and people are talking about India coming up to the 77th place, which is phenomenal, it is the reputation of a country which matters the most. So while the trade agreements are there, what is the infrastructure India has actually put to be a world leader in international trade? I think this is one area where we are grossly lacking. And we're lacking because of factors which can be political, which can be whatever, 60, 70 years. So according to me, I think the key issues or the key areas we need to look as a country and as business houses is, do we have the infrastructure? Look at our ports. Look at our shipping. Look at our roads. Look at the way we today cannot, when we talked of supply chain, Purnima, today we do not have refrigerated transportation, right? So these agreements are on one hand, but that infrastructure, I think, is on the second. We don't have international arbitration. One of the points in ease of doing business was dispute resolution. Today, Singapore, London, they are hubs in international arbitration. Do we have the quality of arbitrators and the infrastructure for that arbitration, which is a good alternate dispute resolution? No. Today, you look at Indian arbitration. The arbitrators are more into their own private or personal causes than causing that subject to really do. What are the quality norms of our products, right? Our drugs, our cosmetics, our food items fail in most of the countries. So where are we there? What is the implementation? What is the confidence? What is the trust? What is the confidence that the guy in India will actually deliver and honor his deliverables? So I think these are the soft skills which really need to be built into the Indian system before we are able to actually and effectively take the benefit of all our trade agreements. When we talk of ease of doing business, and of course the World Bank has given 11 parameters, the World Bank is oblivious, according to me, to the Indian scenario. Because if I was to put parameters on ease of doing business, I would put uncertainty of our laws. The Supreme Court changes a particular ruling which was given by High Court 15 years back on taxation. Look at the way the Vodafone tax case came about. It was international news. So uncertainty of our tax laws, more particularly. Legal processes in terms of arbitration, resolution, and I think most importantly is corruption. So you go to any country and you say that, look, I want to do business. The first thing is, does this person, is he talking of a kickback? How will the kickback route? Is the invoice inclusive of that or is it not inclusive of that? Or people wanting to do business in India, they say that, okay, if there's a dispute, how do we resolve it? It may take 20 years. So I think these are the soft elements which we need to fix more importantly and probably parallelly to whatever agreements India does with other countries.
Yeah, I think largely all of us would agree with the points that you've made, that some of the changes need to be made at the ground level rather than just entering into agreements. And I think that implementation part is now being focused upon not just domestically but internationally also among agreements. They need to ensure that there's transparency, which again would ensure that something is being done or not being done. But before we deliberate upon the points that each of the panelists are making and whether we agree or not with some of the points, I would request Mr. Ashish Deep Verma to give his views on exactly how the government is dealing with the economic reforms. Yeah.
Am I audible? Yes, thanks. Before, it's a lunch stroke session actually. So before I... It's a lunch stroke session, as I said. Learned panelist and ladies and gentlemen. In 2008, I met Arthur Kanagos and Melanie Bennett from United States of America. And there I got to know about Mr. Gary Davis. Mr. Gary Davis happened to be the World War pilot representing US in the Second World War. And during that course, he lost his brother. That was the point he left the fight, and he developed the concepts of world citizenship, world individuality, world globalization, concept of citizenship on one platform. And for that purposes, he generated his own world passport, and he used to be on the borders of different countries for months and months, and then he used to get the entry. And on that world passport, it's very interesting to know that he visited India half a dozen times. It was only in 2008 he was not allowed to enter. He is no more with us, but he laid the foundation, a concept of world citizenship and world individuality. He saw world as a global platform for a base for international trade. It is a very challenging concept, and to 10 minutes wrap up is very difficult. But still, I'd like to start with the emerging market growth today. If we see India, China, Brazil, Asian and South American countries, they are doing amazing emergence in terms of the market growth and development. That is also facilitating, to some extent, potential size and flow of current in the international trade. The technology transfer is another important aspect. I'll take you to. The slides are certain problematic because, yes. Yes, we can start from here. Transfer technology, blockchain, cryptocurrency are the major cause of the call today, wherein we are witnessing a major development in terms of the digitalization of the currency products. And transfer of technology in terms of the commercial aspects as well as the non-commercial aspects are making a momentum in terms of the channelization of the resource base. The recent trends has to be seen in terms of the growth and these transfers of technologies. Liberalization of cross-border movements, free trade and protectionism. If we see, US has recently withdrawn the CPTPP format, wherein 11 countries have signed the free trade movement, and the Brexit today itself has shown how UK is going to get themselves isolated from the EU countries. But the cross-border movements in terms of the trade facilities and also in terms of the free trade restriction that needs to be checked upon has to be taken care and taken note of. So in overall situation, we are in terms of an obligatory situation or obligatory dynamism where we have to take note of certain patterns in terms of the fact that international trade, my learned panelists will be in consonance with me, are changing. They're not static. Anytime, any point in time, the situation can change, and that is a difficult situation it poses an end to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Verma, for your presentation and introducing some of the technological advancements and how they can impact international trade and the way businesses are conducted today. So before we move on further with our discussion, I would like Ms. Purnima Warrior to please give her inputs about exactly what is the situation prevailing in the US and consider the backdrop of the economic reforms that are being implemented in India. Since she's working in an organization which actually creates platform between US and Indian corporate leaders and business houses. So I think she would have a realistic perspective on what exactly is the situation right now.
If I may start a little sexy and juicy topic of tariffs. We talk about trade wars, and it's not new to anyone what's happening across the world. I see these tariffs and trade wars as opportunities that India can avail. For example, when US put tariffs on China, $2 billion worth of farm products were stopped from US going into China because obviously China is going to retaliate. That creates an opportunity for India to be selling agriculture products to China. So I see, where there are challenges, I see opportunity. And I'll give you an example. When India exports products to United States, as far as my knowledge, there is zero tariff. Now, when United States, you must have heard of Harley-Davidson issue, when Prime Minister Modi called President Trump, he said, our tariffs were 50% for Harley-Davidson. Guess what? I've told my guys in India, make it 70%. So, so it'll be less. So Mr. Trump's reply was, मतलब हम तो 100% तुमको माफ कर रहे हैं tariffs, and आप 70 करके हम पे एहसान जता रहे हैं. Probably that's not what the leaders meant, but I'm just saying it in a very layman's voice. So see, there has to be not just free trade, there has to be fair trade. And we need to talk about fair trade. I have been an advisor to United States Secretary of Commerce for almost 10 years, serving various secretaries. And we presented a report to President Obama for growth and policy making of 5.8 million minority businesses of US, which is a $1 trillion economy of US. Now, minority is a word you use here in India for our action. It's not so in United States. It's MBDA is a federal agency, Minority Business Development Agency, that takes care of most of the businesses that are African American owned, Indians, Chinese, Lamong, Vietnamese, Pacific Islanders, and so forth are under those, and also Hispanics. So this whole 5.8 million minority businesses' interests were not seen in the limelight of the general doing business with the world. So there was a disparity, and therefore this development agency was revived. It's a 70-year-old, but wasn't in between, kind of died down, and they revived it again. Growth and policy making is very important, and small and medium-sized enterprises, whether it's in India or United States or the rest of the world, they are the backbone of creating jobs and leading the GDP of the country. The big guys will do whatever, but right now the scenario is the 2-tier and 3-tier cities, which we call in the United States satellite cities, is where all the opportunities are. India tends to go to New York, Chicago, Houston, the big towns, but fail to go to the mountain region, for example, or the 2-tier, 3-tier cities in the United States where all the opportunities are. So we need to engage our businesses. So tariffs was one thing, the retaliation is there. Small things India needs to look at. For example, I had a talk with, I did call upon the Minister of Agriculture, Gajendra Singh Ji Shekhawat, who told me there are tons and thousands of peanuts that are being, are there, and he said, tell me what to do if you tell me United States has opportunity. I said, you know what, you don't need it to export it to United States. Let's use our Make in India, our MSME incentives, our health department, and Niti Aayog need to work together. I can tell you what you can do is make peanut butter right here in India. The peanut butter that you make right now, it's not very edible. People don't like it because it's very smelly. It smells like oil of peanuts. Now, I brought 2 bottles of that. I gave it to your Minister of Agriculture. I also gave it to Minister of Health, Chaubeji, And I said, try this. And if your family and if your children and everyone likes it, let's set up an industry for women over 40 of India that have dreams to pursue. Let's get them out of homes and let them contribute to the GDP of India by creating industries where we can make peanut butter. That also links to the Paushtik, the abhiyan that you have, which is Poshan Abhiyan. And that is going to be utilized also by the women, pregnant women and malnutrition affected kids. This is a very good product that can solve the nutrition issues of India. So it's a simple thing, but goes a long way that we need to utilize our products. India is 82% agriculture country, I know that. 40% of our crop is wasted. Either we are throwing it and feeding to animals, or the crop is not reaching time. My colleague here, absolutely correct, mister, because you said that we don't have refrigerated trucks. Now, it doesn't require an Einstein brain to get those. Let's partner with US companies. We can get the trucks here. We have them. We utilize them when in transporting goods and services. We can also partner with Goodyear kind of companies that have the resources, and let's bring solutions to India, and I'll be very happy if I can do something for India to make my country better.
I have a question from you. As far as infrastructure is concerned, you asked this. But what is the reason of US being so protectionist towards the trade implications? Trump. What is the reason? I know that that's one aspect of being Trump. But yes, what is the practical reason of doing so?
When you get burned, ya doodh ka jala chhach bhi phunk phunk ke peeta hai. We gave a lot to China. We gave a lot of money to Pakistan. And you can see now we are kind of tightening the hands. Mr. Trump, I have a lot of regard for him. Despite of all the negatives that you hear about him, I love the man. And I'll tell you why. Which country? United States today, the stock market at its highest, 1.5% unemployment, never heard of in last 60 to 70 years in the history of United States. So those are the two reasons I love the man. The other things that you talk about, why is, people even talk to me about visas. H1, Trump is doing this, and Trump is doing that, and now wives cannot work. Now come and tell me, if I am a Gora guy, and I bring a lot of Gora guys, they take your jobs away, wouldn't you think about something to take care of your country? President Trump is elected to make America great again, not India. I'm sorry to say that. This is my home country. This is the country of my birth, but my current bhumi is United States, so I'll have to be fair. We talked about fair trade, let's have fair talks. So nothing wrong in it. They will be all revived, the immigration issues and so forth. There are many abuses that are happening, not by Indians, I would say, but perhaps from the borders of Mexico, without naming too many races. But it is a fact that there are illegal people. Now, people that, like myself, who pay taxes in that country, we have to pay a lot of money to get our insurances, health insurance, benefits, and whatnot. But some of these people, they get it for free. Now, illegal people getting everything that they need for free versus people that are working hard, what about them? So I think it's just a matter of Mr. Trump is doing what he needs to do to make things better. I'll take your question.
It's not so much a question as a comment, and then I'd like to hear your response.
Sure.
So in the United States, when people come into the country illegally and have no papers, they actually don't get any free services. And oftentimes, so my name is Tiffany Compress. I'm with Schutz & Bowen. This is not the opinion of Schutz & Bowen. This is the opinion of me as a personal individual and attorney in the United States. So when persons come into the United States and cross the border without papers, whether they're seeking asylum or for whatever reason they don't come, quote unquote, legally, they actually cannot access any services at all for free. And in fact, many of them obtain false social security numbers, not to obtain services, but to pay taxes so that they are not caught and sent back to their country by deportation. So in effect, most of the time, they're frequently contributing to the country and to the bucket for Social Security services for citizens without actually taking any services themselves. So if you can, if there's anything that you'd like to respond to that point.
Yes, yes, I will address that. There is a problem in United States. For example, majority of the people that have to take care of your yards and so forth, I know that some American company told me that I have advertised it several times. Nobody wants to do that work. So in a way, it's a positive thing. What you're saying is some of these people are really contributing to the economy, but I don't know about paying taxes or not, because we usually tend to pay cash to these people. But I am very much in favor of people that can earn an honest living, regardless of where they come from.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think we can just restrict ourselves to the topic that is international trade and ease of doing business. And I think Mr. Rajiv Chauhan has some comments to make on some of the issues that we've already dealt with.
So one comment which I had was that I think for the first time, the recognition of India and the potential of India, its business, where it can take its business, its economy, I think it is being recognized across the world. And I think some, probably your contribution of whatever suggestions you give to the Ministry of Commerce and to the government. And the way I look at it is that if this trend continues, in terms of how India is being perceived, how the government is being perceived, how our business is being perceived, I think in the next 10 years, India undoubtedly will be a major player in the world. There is no two ways about it.
I would actually second that, stating to the tune that if we see the ease of doing business index, India has jumped from 130th country rank to 100th, which is jumping down almost 29 countries. And it's a very significant development in terms of the ease of doing business across the globe. And I would be in agreement with Mr. Chauhan, and if India keep the same pace, then of course we have a good way to go ahead.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Verma. I would like audience to ask questions if they have. Please introduce yourself and let us know what your questions are, and then we'll address the questions one by one. Aren't there any questions?
I think we were clear enough.
So I would like to say one thing just to conclude, if you don't mind.
Sure.
India is going to lead the 21st century, no doubt in my mind. We have a very good reputation, thanks to our Prime Minister of India. I'm a big fan of his only because India has so much respect in the world that it brings tears to my eyes that one man had the vision to make this happen in such a short time. So I don't care what happens with the elections, but I wanted to make this statement because he has done a phenomenal job in the world. We are very well respected. India must focus on Make in India. India is going to be a hub for Asia from distribution point of view. And that is the reason we started our Asia headquarters in Jaipur, because we know that India is going to lead the world. I will not be surprised if United States come number 2nd at some point. I hope people in US that are listening on my Facebook Live are not going to kill me when I arrive there. But India will be the superpower that we expect. Let's all work together. Let's do what is best for India and contribute in our own way. And I'll be happy to work with the Commerce Department. I was hoping that the gentleman would come in the morning, but he didn't. But I'll make an effort to meet him. I would love to work with the Commerce Ministry of India to do my part to make India great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Praka, do you have any comments to make?
Yeah, I just had a few comments on, since we're talking about, improving or for the government to improve on certain core aspects of the economy like infrastructure. And we were talking about regional trade agreements before. Now, I know that as lawyers sometimes, and especially as specialists, we can really overemphasize and focus too much on legal texts and legal agreements. After all, what happens on the ground is completely different. A trader who wants to push his consignment to meet an export deadline is not going to read the free trade agreement to see what the rules are. But it's not a relation of cause and effect, absolutely. But I do think that these are, certain factors that come together at some point of time. Now, if you look at the ease of doing business report and our phenomenal performance in trading across borders, It happened because the government of India set up the National Trade Facilitation Action Plan pursuant to the Trade Facilitation Agreement that entered into. Now, obviously, I agree that for the government of India, the Make in India slogan, Digital India slogan, was way more important than fulfilling Trade Facilitation Agreement. Of course it was, but these things do come together and play into each other in some way or the other. The other aspect is that when we do talk about regional trade agreements and their impact, we have to recognize that they're no longer optional, right? If we are, as an agriculture or, for example, as a major textile manufacturer competing with Vietnam, and if Vietnam has entered into a regional trade agreement with Australia, and if their goods are entering at a lower tariff, we are losing market access. It's really as simple as that. So like as the industry, as legal advisors, as business, we need to have a view on what we want in our regional trade agreements. Dismissing them or lowering or diminishing their importance is not going to help. So,
sorry, probably that was not the intent if you picked it up. What I meant was that agreements have to be there. It's a government-to-government thing. That's the basic fabric on which whatever you need to work. And to me, I think the only reason is that the current government is fighting legacy. It's fighting the past and still managing to do extremely well.
Yeah, that's right. To add on to that,
100%.
we have national action plans now which are being implemented at the state level and at the union territory levels. So I think that is going really well, and that starts actually from international agreements that are being signed and that are being negotiated. And I think so that is an important factor that still prevails, and the only point that at the end bottoms down to is that how we implement it and how we enforce it. And if we are doing that properly, then I think we are going on the right track. So
I would be in agreement with what Shiny is closing down to. The channelization of resource base is equally important. Any questions from the board?
I think I would add also that policies are meant to be implemented. And I think we are making a lot of policies, which is a great framework. But what are we doing for implementing those policies? And if they are not working, what are we doing to change them? So Niti Aayog and we can work together also on these. And at least for agriculture, I told the Minister of Agriculture, I'll come up with 20 to 50 policy changes for the agriculture department, because the biggest problem I see in India is that departments don't talk to each other. The health department is doing their own thing, agriculture is doing their own thing, MSME is doing their own thing, and Niti Aayog is making the policies. Now, unless they talk to each other, how are we going to progress? India needs to talk to, these departments needs to talk, because let's say if we are talking about Poshan Abhiyan, it relates to health ministry, it relates to agriculture. So departments need to talk to each other. I think more communication and more working together is needed in India, as well as in other parts of the world. Thank you.
that's right. I think we've run out of time, but can you quickly raise your question?
I'd like to come back to the tariff points. Now, when we are looking at the tariffs, when you're sitting in this continent, there are different tariffs for the different countries, what we're really looking at. Look at Bangladesh and look at India. I would like to go on a particular example, like for leather. When we export from here, there's an 8.75% duty in the United States, whereas when Bangladesh exports, there is nil tariff. Plus, of course, there's a country to country, of course, there's a duty drawback also. They get a 22%, and whereas India gets nothing, it's just 2.6%. So how do we really compare both the countries? Now here we are right on the borders. So I think probably we will have to really look at it in terms of regional wise. If the countries have to really grow, I think the tariffs have to be really controlled everywhere.
I think we need to talk to each other. By that I mean India and United States, or whoever you are doing business with. We can't have one size fits all, because each country has their own challenges, each country has their own resources, and so forth. And so I think I'll be happy to talk to whoever, and if I can make a dent in the GDP of India by my thoughts and whatever I can do for India, it's my country, I love my India, Vatan Mera India, Sajan Mera India.
Thank you, ma'am.
Just a brief comment also. And as far as the private sector, I agree very much with so many things that you're saying. I think that India is very much poised to be a superpower. And I think one of the aspects that is crucial, and this is a plug because I'm in international arbitration, I think commercial international arbitration agreements are key to helping importers and exporters and investors in feeling comfortable in doing business with India. Business people need to feel comfortable and taken care of. And another point also is I think that we as attorneys need to also educate our clients with respect to how to manage some of these tariff challenges that they're facing. Perhaps using Incoterms, making it DDP or X work so that they don't have to bear that burden themselves. And that's just a little final thing. And the next talk is on international arbitration, so if you'd like to stay to see us, that would be great.
One last thing I would say is, we talk about doing business with India. The first problem that people have is corruption. And one must realize that we as United States citizens have a very serious thing, which is Foreign Corrupt Practice Act. If I get a phone call when people are telling me that, Purnima, we are giving bribes left and right, and we are very successful in India, believe me, I put the phone down. Because even if I hear such thing, I can be in United States jail. So please no, don't say that India ke partner kar lega wo sab kaam. No, 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 no. If my chamber office is here and that person does any such thing, believe me, nothing will happen to him because here aapko ministers bacha lenge, yeah, whatever. But in United States, I will be in a US jail. So be nice to me, please.
Yeah, I think we mostly agree with what challenges we are facing and how we're moving forward. There are some positive points that are already trends that rather we can see right now. And there are challenges which remain. But I think we are still moving on the right track largely. So yeah, I think thank you all for giving a patient hearing. And thank you all the panelists for joining us and giving really wonderful inputs. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. This has been a very informative session. I would now like to invite Ms. Tiffany and Chris of Schatz & Bowen to present the momentum to the panel. The next panel discussion is on the topic of navigating commercial disputes in the US and managing risk, best practice for Indian attorneys, arbitration or litigation. I would like to invite Mr.